Zara Bennett thought she had successfully buried her past under 5 years of quiet suburban living. Her lungs still burn whenever it rains. It's not the cold. It's the memory of the night the music died in a hail of glass and lead at a Seoul nightclub. 5 years ago, she pressed her shaking hands against her stomach, hiding behind a row of smashed liquor bottles while Ryu Sungkwan's hitmen turned the bar into a graveyard. That was the night she realized what loving Kang Joon-Hyuk, the Dragon of Seoul, actually cost. Cost her everything. She didn't just run. She vanished. She became a ghost to protect the 2 tiny heartbeats growing inside her. Now, Zara lives in a quiet suburb where the only explosions are the sounds of cereal bowls hitting the floor. Her neighbors see a devoted single mother. They see the normal chaos. Tying shoelaces, packing lunchboxes, Noah arguing about his math homework, Nia hunting for a missing glittery shoe. Safe chaos. The kind of life Zara thought she had finally bought with her silence. But in the underworld, ghosts are always hunted. By 1 p.m., the air in the school auditorium changed. It didn't smell like floor wax and crayons anymore. It smelled of expensive wood smoke and ozone. A scent Zara hadn't breathed in 5 years, but one her soul recognized instantly. The school's secret benefactor had arrived. Zara stood in the shadows of the back row, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She told herself she was safe. She told herself a man like Joon-Hyuk wouldn't look at ordinary children. Then Noah stepped onto the stage. He didn't just walk. He moved with a cold, precise grace. He adjusted his tie with a sharp flick of his wrist, the exact habit Joon-Hyuk performed before a negotiation. In the front row, the chairman froze. Kang Joon-Hyuk didn't need a DNA test. He wasn't looking at a student. He was looking at his own soul, split in two, standing on a stage decorated with construction paper. He didn't look like a philanthropist anymore. He looked like a predator who had just realized his most prized possession had been stolen. Not by an enemy, but by the only woman he ever loved. In that instant, the truth hit harder than any bullet. Zara didn't just leave. She took his legacy. Now, the enemies of the dragon are resurfacing, eager to use the twins as leverage. But they made one fatal mistake. A mafia boss can survive betrayal, but a father will burn down every kingdom on earth to protect his children. And this time, the war is personal. Before we continue, where in the world are you watching from? I'm genuinely curious to see how far Zara and Joon-Hyuk's story has traveled today. Drop your country or city in the comments below. I'd love to see our global community. And if you're hooked on this journey, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a heartbeat of the war to come. Now, let's begin. The air in the Onyx room was always heavy, like the thick, static-charged minutes before a summer thunderstorm. It was a place where the music didn't just play. It throbbed, a low-frequency pulse that vibrated in the soles of Zara's feet and the marrow of her bones. Back then, 5 years ago, the world was a kaleidoscope of neon blues and jagged shadows, and Zara Bennett was just a girl who had learned how to balance a tray of crystal glassware while navigating a sea of men who looked at her like she was on the menu. But there was only one man in that room whose gaze actually mattered. Kang Joon-Hyuk sat in the corner booth, the unofficially designated throne of the nightclub. He was a silhouette carved out of the darkness, his charcoal suit impeccably tailored to hide the lethal muscles and the intricate ink that mapped his skin. To the rest of Seoul, he was the dragon, a man whose whisper could collapse a corporate empire and whose silence was more terrifying than a shout. To Zara, he was the man who liked his scotch neat, his ice clear, and who had spent the last 6 months looking at her with a hunger that had nothing to do with the drinks she served. Zara felt the weight in her apron pocket, a small plastic stick that felt heavier than a lead weight. She had looked at the 2 pink lines in a cramped, fluorescent-lit bathroom only an hour ago. Her heart hadn't stopped hammering since. She was 23, working 3 jobs, and she was carrying the child of Korea's most feared man. She knew the rules of his world. She knew that power like his didn't allow for soft spots. But every time he touched her hand when she set down his glass, every time he stayed until the lights came up just to watch her walk to her locker, she allowed herself to believe in a different version of the story. "You're late with the refill, Zara." His voice was a low rasp, cutting through the bass of the house music. She stepped into the circle of his space, the air suddenly smelling of his signature wood smoke and ozone. The bar was crowded. Joon-Hyuk? She replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her soul. She set the glass down, her fingers grazing his. The contact sent a familiar jolt through her, a spark of electricity that usually made her feel alive. Tonight, it made her feel like she was standing on a landmine. He caught her wrist, his thumb tracing the delicate pulse point. His eyes, dark and observant, narrowed. You're pale, and your heart is racing. Did someone bother you tonight? The question wasn't a casual inquiry. It was a threat directed at the rest of the world. He was a man who claimed what he loved with a terrifying, absolute possessiveness. I'm fine, she whispered, leaning closer. The club was a cacophony of laughter and clinking ice, but in the small space between them, it was silent. I need to tell you something. After your meeting, can we go somewhere quiet? Joon-Hyuk's expression softened, a rare crack in the armor he wore for the world. He reached up, his hand cupping her jaw, his thumb dragging across her lower lip. Anything you want, Zara. Stay close tonight. I don't like the feel of the air in here. He was right to be suspicious. In the underworld, peace was just a lull between wars. Zara nodded, turning back toward the bar, her mind spinning with 1,000 ways to tell him. I'm pregnant. We're having a baby. I'm scared. Asterisk. She reached the service station, her back to the booth, when the music suddenly died. It didn't fade out. It was cut, leaving a vacuum of silence that was instantly filled by the sound of a heavy metal door being kicked off its hinges. Then came the sound that would haunt Zara's dreams for the next 5 years. The rhythmic, mechanical clack-clack of assault rifles being readied. Down. Everyone down. The first spray of bullets didn't hit a person. It hit the back bar. Hundreds of bottles of expensive gin, vodka, and whiskey exploded in a synchronized rain of glass and fire. The smell of high-proof alcohol and gunpowder filled the room instantly, a cloying, suffocating mixture. Zara felt a hand seize the back of her uniform and jerk her violently to the floor. Don't move, Joon-Hyuk hissed. He had cleared the distance between the booth and the bar in a heartbeat. He shoved her beneath the heavy oak counter, his body a literal shield between her and the rain of lead. Joon-Hyuk, what's happening? She screamed, but her voice was drowned out by a fresh volley of gunfire. Ryu Sungkwan, Joon-Hyuk growled, his voice vibrating with a primal, predatory rage. He's tired of waiting for a fair fight. Zara curled into a ball, her hands instinctively clutching her stomach. The floor was covered in a rising tide of spilled liquor and jagged shards of crystal. Every breath she took felt like inhaling needles as the gunpowder smoke began to settle in her lungs. This was the reality of the dragon. This was the cost of the charcoal suits and the private booths. Above her, she heard the heavy thud of Joon-Hyuk's own weapon firing back. A steady, rhythmic response that spoke of a man who was most comfortable in the center of a bloodbath. Stay here, he commanded. He stood up, pivoting around the edge of the bar. Zara watched through a gap in the shelving. The club, once a palace of luxury, was now a slaughterhouse. Men in tactical gear were moving through the shadows, their muzzle flashes illuminating the carnage. She saw Joon-Hyuk move like a shadow among shadows. He wasn't just defending, he was hunting. He moved with a cold, precise grace that made her stomach turn. He caught a man by the throat, the sound of breaking bone audible even over the chaos, and used the body as a shield while he emptied his clip into 2 more attackers. In that moment, the veil was stripped away. Zara didn't see the man who had cupped her jaw and promised her a quiet night. She saw the monster. She saw the most feared boss in Korea, a man whose hands were stained so deeply in blood that they would never be clean again. A bullet ricocheted off the brass footrail inches from her head, sending a spray of splinters into her arm. She didn't cry out. The shock had moved beyond pain into a cold, paralyzing clarity. If she stayed here, she was a liability. If she stayed with him, her child would grow up in the shadow of these guns. The little life inside her wouldn't be a person. It would be a target. It would be leverage. The back exit, someone shouted. Get the girl. They were looking for her. Ryu Sungkwan knew who she was. The realization hit her harder than any physical blow. To the enemies of the dragon, she wasn't a woman. She was a vulnerability. She was a weakness to be exploited. Joon-Hyuk was engaged with 3 men near the DJ booth, his focus momentarily diverted. Zara knew this was her only window. She didn't think about her purse, her phone, or the life she had built in Seoul. She only thought about the heartbeat in her womb. She scrambled backward through the spilled whiskey, her hands and knees bleeding from the glass, and crawled toward the narrow service door that led to the kitchen. She burst through the swinging doors into a world of stainless steel and abandoned orders. The kitchen staff had already fled through the loading docks. Zara ran, her lungs burning, the smell of the nightclub still clinging to her hair and clothes. She reached the back alley just as the rain began to fall. A cold, torrential Seoul downpour that washed the blood from her hands but couldn't touch the terror in her heart. She didn't stop running until she reached the main road. She hailed a taxi with trembling hands, her uniform torn and soaked. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked, looking at her through the rearview mirror with a mix of pity and fear. "The bus terminal," she whispered. "Anywhere heading south." As the taxi pulled away, she looked back at the glowing neon sign of the club. Police sirens were already wailing in the distance, their red and blue lights reflecting in the puddles. She knew Joon-Hyuk would survive. He was a creature of the dark. He always survived. But she also knew that if he found her, he would never let her go. He would wrap her in his world of silk and steel, and the cycle of violence would claim her children before they ever took their first breaths. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the pregnancy test. It was snapped in two, broken during the chaos. She let the pieces fall onto the floor of the taxi. Zara Bennett was dead. The waitress who loved a king was gone. By the time the sun rose over a small, coastal town 300 miles away, Zara had already bought a new phone and a burner SIM card. She sat in a cheap motel room, her hair chopped short with kitchen scissors, watching the news. The headline was a gangland shootout in Gangnam. No names were released, but she knew. She rubbed her stomach, the skin still flat and unremarkable. "It's just us now," she whispered to the silence. "I'll keep you safe. I'll hide you so deep that even the dragon won't find us." She had vanished into the rain, becoming a ghost. But as she watched the rain lash against the motel window, she could still smell the wood smoke and ozone. She could still feel the phantom heat of his hand on her jaw. She had run to save them, but she knew, deep down, that ghosts were never truly free. They were simply waiting for the day the past decided to stop being a memory and start being a hunter. 5 years of silence followed. 5 years of changing her name, her job, her life. But every time it rained, her lungs burned with the memory of that bar. And every time she looked into the eyes of her twins, she saw the man she had left behind. A king without a throne. A dragon who had lost his most precious treasure. And a father who would eventually realize that a secret this big couldn't stay buried forever. The night the music stopped was the end of her life. But as she closed her eyes in that motel room, she didn't know it was also the beginning of a war that would eventually burn through every safety net she had ever built. The dragon was still out there, and he didn't like losing what belonged to him. The silence inside the armored SUV was absolute, the kind of heavy, pressurized quiet that usually preceded a death sentence. Kang Joon-Hyuk sat in the back seat, his gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window, but he wasn't seeing the neon-blurred streets of Seoul. He was seeing a 5-year-old boy on a stage, the way the child's small fingers had twitched as he adjusted his tie, the way his jaw had set with a stubborn, silent defiance that mirrored the reflection Joon-Hyuk saw in the mirror every morning. The scotch in his hand was untouched, the ice long since melted into a tepid amber pool. Beside him, his lead enforcer, a man known only as Director Park, remained as motionless as a statue. Park had been with the dragon for a decade. He knew that when Joon-Hyuk was this quiet, the world was about to burn. "The boy," Joon-Hyuk finally spoke, his voice a low vibration that seemed to grate against the leather upholstery. "He didn't just look like me, Park. He moved like me. He breathed like me." Park didn't need further instruction. He had already seen the tremor in his boss's hands when the girl, Nia, had looked directly into the front row with those wide, fearless eyes. I've already pulled the school's digital registry, Chairman. The children are listed as Noah and Nia Bennett. The mother is registered as a Zara Bennett, a widow. She's been living in the Gyeonggi district for the last 3 years. Widow? Joon-Hyuk repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. He leaned back, closing his eyes, and for a moment, the smell of the school's floor wax vanished, replaced by the scent of spilled whiskey and gunpowder. He remembered the night of the bar shooting with a clarity that made his chest ache. He had spent months tearing Seoul apart, looking for Zara's body, refusing to believe she could have simply vanished. He had assumed Ryu Sungkwan had taken her. He had started a war that had painted the streets of Gangnam red, all in the name of a woman he thought was a ghost. To find out she had been breathing, living, and raising his blood in a quiet suburb while he mourned her was a betrayal that stung sharper than any blade. Find her, Joon-Hyuk commanded, his eyes snapping open. I don't want a file. I want her soul. I want to know every person she's spoken to, everyone she's spent, and every place she's slept for the last 1800 days. And Park? If anyone else is watching that house, if Ryu's people have so much as smelled the air in that neighborhood, I want their heads on my desk by dawn. The investigation began with the cold, clinical efficiency that had made Joon-Hyuk's empire untouchable. While the rest of the city slept, the dragon's shadow moved through the digital and physical world. Director Park set up a mobile command center in the heart of the district, his team of analysts bypassing government firewalls with the ease of ghosts. They started at the school, the very place the secret had begun to unravel. Park himself walked into the principal's office an hour after midnight. He didn't use a gun. He used a black titanium card and a look that suggested the school's funding would vanish along with the principal's career if the files weren't handed over. By 3 a.m., the ghost began to take shape. The woman known as Zara Bennett was a masterpiece of evasion. Her social security number belonged to a woman who had died in a car accident in a rural province 6 years ago. Her bank accounts were a series of small, untraceable deposits from various part-time jobs, waitressing, cleaning, freelance translation. She had avoided every major facial recognition camera in the city, choosing routes that took her through narrow alleys and forgotten markets. She was a woman who lived in the margins, a woman who had mastered the art of being invisible. But no one stays invisible from the dragon forever. Park stared at the monitors, watching a graining security feed from a convenience store 3 blocks from Zara's apartment. It was from 2 days ago. A woman in a faded trench coat was holding the hands of 2 small children. She was laughing at something the boy said, her face partially obscured by a scarf. But then, she turned to check the street. A quick, instinctive glance that spoke of 5 years of looking over her shoulder. The camera caught her eyes. It's her, Park whispered into his headset. He cross-referenced the image with the file Joon-Hyuk kept in a locked safe in his office, the only photo he had of the waitress from the Onyx room. The software ran the comparison. 99.8% match. He scrolled deeper into the school records, looking at the medical files. The birth certificates were forgeries, but the blood types were listed. Both children were O-negative. The same rare type as Kang Joon-Hyuk. Park felt a chill crawl down his spine. This wasn't just a discovery. It was an earthquake. The twins weren't just hers. They were the heirs to the most powerful criminal organization in East Asia, and they were currently eating cereal in a 2-bedroom apartment that didn't even have a reinforced door. As the sun began to bleed over the horizon, painting the Seoul skyline in bruised purples and oranges, Park compiled the final report. He tracked the Zara Bennett alias back to its origin. She had first appeared in a coastal hospital 5 years ago, 3 months after the bar shooting. She had arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back and a wound on her hip that she claimed was from a fall. She had given birth to the twins alone, in a public ward, while Joon-Hyuk was burning down Ryu Sungkwan's warehouses in a fit of grief-stricken rage. The report grew more detailed as the morning progressed. Park's men visited the apartment complex disguised as utility workers. They mapped the exits, the blind spots of the building's meager security, and the schedule of the neighbors. They found that Sarah left for work at 8 a.m., dropping the children at school before heading to a local bakery where she worked the morning shift. She was liked by the community. They called her the quiet widow. They thought she was a woman who had lost her husband to a tragic accident. They had no idea she was the queen of a kingdom she had spent every waking moment trying to escape. But the most chilling discovery came at 7 a.m. One of the analysts flagged a digital ping from a different source. Someone else had been searching for the name Zara Bennett on the dark web. The IP address was masked, but the signature was familiar. It carried the digital watermark of the Ryu syndicate. Park felt a surge of adrenaline. If Ryu Sungkwan found out about the twins before Joon-Hyuk reached them, the school auction wouldn't be a memory. It would be a prelude to a massacre. He didn't wait to finalize the document. He grabbed his coat and headed straight for the chairman's penthouse. Joon-Hyuk was standing on his balcony, the cold morning air whipping his white shirt against his chest. He hadn't slept. He hadn't changed. He looked like a man who was already halfway to a war zone. When Park entered, he didn't need to speak. He simply handed Joon-Hyuk a tablet containing the photo of Zara at the convenience store and the location of the apartment. Joon-Hyuk stared at the image of Zara holding the twins' hands. His thumb traced over the digital image of her face, his expression unreadable. For 5 years, he had been the dragon, a creature of fire and vengeance. But looking at this photo, he felt a strange, terrifying hollowness. She had looked so happy in that grainy footage. She looked safe. She looked like a woman who had successfully built a world without him. The Ryu syndicate is sniffing around the name, Park said, his voice grave. They don't have the address yet, but they know she's alive. It's only a matter of time, Chairman. Joon-Hyuk's grip on the tablet tightened until the screen began to spiderweb. The hollowness vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp purpose. He didn't care about her betrayal anymore. He didn't care about the 5 years of lies. The only thing that mattered was the fact that his heart was beating in 3 different bodies in a neighborhood that wasn't protected by his guns. Get the cars, Joon-Hyuk said, his voice deathly quiet. All of them. We aren't going there for a conversation, Park. We're going there to bring my family home. Chairman, if we move with that much force, we'll alert the authorities. The district is quiet. The police will. I don't care about the police, Joon-Hyuk interrupted, turning to face his enforcer. His eyes were no longer those of a businessman or a benefactor. They were the eyes of the man who had survived a graveyard. I don't care about the laws and I don't care about the scandal. Ryu Sungkwan is coming for my children. I will burn every bridge in this country to make sure he finds nothing but ashes when he gets there. He walked past Park, grabbing his charcoal jacket from the chair. The smell of wood smoke and ozone seemed to intensify, filling the room with a static charge. As he stepped into the elevator, the predator was fully awake. The investigation was over. The hunt had begun. Zara Bennett had spent 5 years becoming a ghost, but she had forgotten one thing about the dragon. He was the only creature that could see through the dark, and now he was coming to reclaim the legacy she had stolen, whether she was ready for him or not. The motorcade of black SUVs pulled out of the basement garage moments later, a silent, lethal serpent winding its way toward the suburbs. In the lead car, Joon-Hyuk watched the GPS dot crawl toward the quiet apartment complex. He thought about the boy's tie. He thought about the girl's eyes. And he thought about the woman who had dared to think she could outrun a man who owned the shadows. The normal chaos of Zara's life was about to end. And in its place, the dragon was bringing a storm that would change everything. The war wasn't just personal anymore. It was absolute. The morning light in the Gyeonggi district was thin and gray, filtered through a permanent layer of low-hanging clouds that seemed to mirror the quiet, unremarkable life Zara Bennett had built for herself. Inside apartment 4B, the air was warm and smelled of cinnamon toast and the lingering scent of laundry detergent. It was a domestic sanctuary, a place where the most dangerous thing was a toy car left on the floor or a forgotten spill on the kitchen tile. Zara was in the kitchen, her back to the window, her hands automatically scrubbing a stubborn spot of jam off the table. She was dressed in a soft, oversized sweater and worn leggings, a far cry from the sleek, form-fitting uniform she had worn at the Onyx Room. Here, she was just Sarah, the widow who worked at the bakery and never missed a parent-teacher meeting. She heard the sound of the children in the next room. Noah and Nia were supposed to be getting their shoes on, but they were currently embroiled in a low-stakes argument about whose turn it was to carry the red backpack. Zara smiled to herself, a small, tired twist of the lips. This was the peace she had traded her soul for. This was the safe chaos she had envisioned while she lay bleeding on a cold nightclub floor. She reached for a towel to dry her hands, her mind already moving toward the morning commute, when the world outside the window suddenly went silent. It wasn't a natural silence. It was the heavy, artificial hush that falls over a neighborhood when something foreign and predatory enters its ecosystem. Zara froze, her heart skipping a beat as an instinctual chill crawled up her spine. She turned slowly, her eyes drifting to the window. Down in the narrow street, 5 black SUVs had materialized out of the morning mist like a fleet of silent sharks. They didn't park. They occupied the space, blocking the exits with a tactical precision that made her blood run cold. She didn't need to see the license plates or the dark-tinted glass. She knew the silhouette of those vehicles. She knew the weight of the power they carried. The towel slipped from her hand, hitting the linoleum with a soft thud. 5 years. She had spent 1,800 days believing she was a ghost, believing that the Dragon of Seoul had finally closed the book on the waitress who had vanished into the rain. But as she watched the door of the lead car swing open, she realized that ghosts were only invisible as long as the hunter allowed them to be. Kang Joon-Hyuk stepped out of the vehicle, and the neighborhood seemed to shrink in his presence. He was a jagged shard of reality piercing through her suburban dream. He wore a charcoal suit that looked like armor, his posture radiating a lethal, controlled authority that made the modest apartment building look like a house of cards. He didn't look up at her window. He didn't need to. He moved toward the entrance of the building with a slow, deliberate stride, flanked by Director Park and a phalanx of guards who moved with the silent coordination of a strike team. "Noah, Nia," Zara whispered, her voice cracking. "Go to your room. Right now." "But Mama, the backpack," Noah started, poking his head around the corner. He stopped when he saw his mother's face. Zara's skin was the color of ash, her eyes wide with a terror he had never seen before. "Into the room. Lock the door. Do not come out until I say so. Do you hear me?" The twins didn't argue. The sheer intensity of her voice, a frequency of pure survival, sent them scurrying back into their bedroom. Zara heard the click of the lock, but it offered no comfort. A wooden door was nothing to the man who was currently ascending the stairs. She stood in the center of the living room, her hands trembling so violently she had to clench them into fists. She looked around her apartment, the framed finger paintings on the wall, the mismatched sofa, the pile of library books on the coffee table. It felt like a stage set that was about to be dismantled. The footsteps in the hallway were heavy and rhythmic, a countdown to the end of her life. They stopped outside her door. There was no knock. There was no polite request for entry. The lock turned with a sharp, mechanical click. Park's men had likely bypassed it in seconds, and the door swung open. Joon-Hyuk walked in first. The smell reached her before he did. Wood smoke and ozone, the scent of the man who had cupped her jaw in a dark nightclub and the man who had shielded her from a rain of bullets. He looked around the small, cramped room with a clinical detachment that was more terrifying than rage. His gaze lingered on a photo of the twins on the mantel, then slowly tracked back to Zara. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air in the room felt pressurized, the silence so thick it was hard to breathe. Zara felt 5 years of lies crumbling under the weight of his stare. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper, his expression a mask of cold, unbreakable iron. But beneath that mask, she saw the dragon. The predator who had finally cornered the only thing that had ever escaped him. "Zara," he said. Her name sounded like a prayer and a threat at the same time. His voice was lower than she remembered, a raspy vibration that seemed to shake the very walls of the apartment. "My name is Sarah," she whispered, a pathetic, reflexive defense. "You have the wrong person. Please, I have children here. Whatever you think this is." Joon-Hyuk took a step toward her, and the space between them vanished. He didn't touch her, but his presence was an overwhelming force, a gravity that pulled the air from her lungs. "The school records say Sarah. The neighbors say Sarah. But your eyes." He leaned in closer, his dark gaze searching hers, his voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate murmur. Your eyes still tell me the truth. You're the ghost I've been hunting in every dark alley of this city for 5 years. He turned his head slightly, looking toward the closed bedroom door. Zara moved instinctively, stepping into his line of sight, her arms spread as if she could shield her children with her body. Don't go near them. They have my eyes, Zara, Joon-Hyuk said, his voice flat, devoid of the emotion she was searching for. The boy even has the scar on his temple where Ryu's man grazed me 10 years ago. Genetics are a cruel thing for a woman trying to hide a legacy. He stepped past her, his hand reaching out to touch the frame of a finger painting on the wall. It was a messy, colorful sun Nia had painted last week. You raised them here? In this box? He looked around at the humble furniture, the worn carpet, the lack of security. You lived like a beggar while I sat on a throne that belonged to them as much as it belongs to me. You let them grow up without a name, without a father. I let them grow up safe. Zara found her voice, the terror finally giving way to a desperate, maternal fury. I let them grow up without the smell of gunpowder in their hair. I let them sleep without wondering if a bomb was under their bed, or if their father was going to be brought home in a body bag. Joon-Hyuk flinched. It was a microscopic movement, a tightening of the jaw, but she saw it. He turned back to her, his expression shifting from cold detachment to something raw and agonizing. He took another step, cornering her against the kitchen counter, his hands coming up to grip the edge of the laminate on either side of her. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his chest, could see the tiny pulse jumping in his neck. Director Park and the guards stepped back into the hallway, closing the door and leaving them in a suffocating, private vacuum. You think I would have let them be hurt? Joon-Hyuk hissed. You think I would have let anything touch what was mine? What was ours? You couldn't even protect me at the bar. Zara screamed, the memory of the glass shattering and the blood on her hands rushing back with a vengeance. You were a god in that room, Joon-Hyuk, and you were still helpless against the world you built. I saw you that night. I saw the monster you are when the guns come out. I didn't want my children to ever see that face. Joon-Hyuk's grip on the counter tightened until the wood groaned. He looked at her with a mix of lethal rage and a heartbreak so profound it made her knees weak. He had spent 5 years in a cold, lonely purgatory, fueled by the belief that she was dead or had betrayed him. To find her alive, to find her thriving in a life she preferred over him, was a wound he didn't know how to heal. He leaned down, his forehead almost touching hers, his breath fanning across her lips. The silence returned, but this time it was heavy with the weight of 5 years of unasked questions. He looked at the woman he had loved, the woman who had stolen his future, and the woman who was now the only thing that could make him feel human again. Why? He finally whispered. The word wasn't a command or a roar. It was a broken plea that shattered the last of Zara's defenses. Why, Zara? I would have given you the world. I would have built a fortress around you so thick the sun couldn't get in unless you asked it to. I loved you. I would have burned soul to the ground to keep you. Why did you choose this nothingness over me? Zara looked into his eyes and saw the dragon bleeding. She saw the man who had searched for her in the rain, the man who had mourned a ghost, and the man who was now realizing that his power meant nothing if he couldn't keep the one person who mattered. She thought of the 5 years of quiet mornings, the 5 years of safety, and the 5 years of missing him in every heartbeat. Because the world you offered was a cage, Joon-Hyuk, she said, her voice a soft, tragic echo of his. And I wanted my children to be free. Joon-Hyuk stared at her, his jaw set, his eyes dark with a resolve that told her the conversation was over. He straightened up, his mask of iron sliding back into place. He didn't look like a heartbroken man anymore. He looked like the boss. He looked like the man who was about to reclaim his legacy by force. The cage is already open, Zara, he said, turning toward the bedroom door. And Ryu Sungkwan knows where you live. You didn't buy them freedom. You just bought them 5 years of being undefended. That ends today. He walked toward the twins' door, and Zara knew that the 5-year silence hadn't just been broken. It had been detonated. The normal chaos was gone. And in its place, The dragon was bringing a war that would make the bar shooting look like a memory. Joon-Hyuk's hand froze on the brass handle of the bedroom door. The silence in the apartment wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of pressurized stillness that exists inside a bomb a second before the timer hits zero. Behind that door were two heartbeats, the only two things in the world that shared his blood, his features, and his destiny. He was a man who didn't wait. He was a man who reclaimed, who conquered, and who dictated the terms of reality. But as he stood there, the weight of Zara's gaze felt like a physical barrier, a wall made of 5 years of secrets and a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. "If you open that door," Zara said, her voice dropping to a jagged, broken whisper that cut through the silence like a blade, "you aren't just meeting your children, you're ending their lives. You're inviting the shadows into the only place they've ever been safe." Joon-Hyuk didn't turn around immediately. He looked at the grain of the wood on the door, his knuckles white as he gripped the handle. "The shadows are already here, Zara. They followed me the moment I stepped out of the car. They were here when Ryu's men started sniffing around the school records. You think silence is a shield? It's just a delay. You didn't hide them. You just left them undefended." He turned then, and the expression on his face was one Zara had only seen once before, on the night the bar turned into a graveyard. It was a mask of absolute terrifying purpose. But beneath the frost of his dark eyes, there was a flicker of something raw, a wound that hadn't been allowed to scar. "I didn't choose to leave you, Joon-Hyuk." Zara stepped forward, her hands clenched at her sides, her voice trembling with the weight of the 5-year-old confession. "I chose to let them live. There is a difference between loyalty and survival. And that night, I realized that loving you was a luxury my children couldn't afford." Joon-Hyuk let go of the door handle and moved toward her, his stride slow and predatory, closing the distance until he was towering over her. The smell of wood smoke and ozone intensified, a sensory trigger that sent Zara's mind spiraling back to the night of broken glass. He grabbed her by the upper arms, not roughly, but with a desperation that bordered on violence. "You owed me the truth," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "You owed me the chance to protect my own blood. You saw me as a monster, so you treated me like one. You let me believe I was alone in this world for 5 years. I saw you almost die." Zara screamed back, the trauma finally bursting through the seams of her composure. "You talk about protection? You talk about being the dragon? I was there, Joon-Hyuk. I was behind that bar, covered in the gin and whiskey of your broken empire, and I watched you take a bullet meant for the man next to you. I watched the most powerful man in Seoul stumble. I saw the look in your eyes when you realized you weren't a god. You were just a man who could be bled out by any coward with a trigger finger." The air in the room seemed to vanish. Zara was gasping now, the phantom smell of gunpowder filling her lungs as if the apartment were suddenly thick with the smoke of the onyx room. "You looked at me," she continued, her voice shaking, "and for 1 second, I didn't see the boss. I didn't see the man who owned the city. I saw a target. And then I looked down at my stomach, at the 2 lives I hadn't even told you about yet, and I realized that if I stayed, I wasn't being loyal to you. I was being an accomplice to their murder. Loyalty to the dragon is a death sentence for the innocent. I chose life, Joon-Hyuk. I chose their life over your loyalty." Joon-Hyuk's grip on her arms loosened, his hands sliding down to her wrists. He looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time, not as a ghost, not as a traitor, but as the woman who had survived a war he had invited her into. The rage in his eyes began to shift, replaced by a haunting, hollow realization. "You saw me bleed," he whispered, the words sounding alien coming from him. "And you decided I wasn't enough to keep them safe." "No." Zara shook her head, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path through the dust of her memories. "I decided you were too much. You are a lightning rod for tragedy, Joon-Hyuk. Everything you touch eventually burns. I loved the fire once, but I couldn't let it consume them. Look at this apartment. It's small, it's cheap, and it's nothing compared to your penthouse. But do you know what isn't here? Bulletproof glass, armed guards in the hallways, the constant, suffocating weight of wondering who is trying to kill us today." She pulled her hands away and walked over to the mantel, picking up a small glass jar filled with pebbles. Nia collected these at the park last week. To her, they're treasures. In your world, a pebble is just something you use to weigh down a body. Noah wants to be an architect. He wants to build things that stay standing. If he were with you, he'd spend his life learning how to tear things down. Joon-Hyuk stood in the center of the room, a charcoal-clad intruder in a world of finger paintings and cinnamon toast. He looked at his hands. Hands that had ordered hits, hands that had dismantled rivals, hands that were now trembling with the weight of a loss he couldn't quantify. "It's in their blood, Zara," he said, his voice regaining its steel, though the edge was blunted by sorrow. "You can change their names, you can chop your hair, you can hide in the suburbs until you forget who you were. But the truth is in the blood. They are O-negative. They are defiant. They are mine. And Ryu Sungkwan knows it. He doesn't care that you chose life over loyalty. He only sees the leverage. He only sees a way to hurt the dragon." He moved to the window, pulling back the thin lace curtain to look at the street below. His motorcade was still there, a silent, black serpent coiled around the block. But his eyes were scanning the rooftops, the parked cars, the shadows between the buildings. "5 years ago, I thought I lost you to a bullet," he said, his back to her. "I spent months looking for a body that didn't exist. I burned half of Seoul to the ground because I thought Ryu had taken the only thing that made me feel human. I was a monster then because I had nothing left to lose. But now..." He turned back to her, and the look in his eyes made Zara's heart stop. It wasn't the predator anymore. It was something far more dangerous. It was a father with a purpose. "Now I have everything to lose. And Ryu knows it. He's been watching this school for 3 days, Zara. He waited for me to find you. He wanted me to be right here in this safe apartment when he makes his move. You think you chose life? You just walked into a trap that's been 5 years in the making." A sudden, sharp metallic tink echoed through the room, the sound of something small hitting the glass of the window. Joon-Hyuk didn't hesitate. He dived across the room, tackling Zara to the floor just as the window exploded inward. A spray of glass shards rained down on them, followed by the muffled thump of a smoke canister skittering across the carpet. "Noah! Nia!" Zara screamed, her voice muffled by Joon-Hyuk's chest as he pinned her down, shielding her with his body just as he had done at the bar 5 years ago. "Stay down!" Joon-Hyuk roared. He pulled a suppressed handgun from the small of his back, his movements fluid and instinctive. The wood smoke and ozone were gone, replaced by the acrid, stinging stench of gray smoke pouring from the canister. Through the haze, the sound of the bedroom door clicking open echoed like a gunshot. "Manga!" Noah's small, terrified voice drifted through the smoke. Zara struggled against Joon-Hyuk's weight, her eyes stinging, her heart breaking. "Noah, get back. Lock the door." But it was too late. The front door of the apartment was kicked off its hinges with a thunderous crash. 3 men in tactical gear, their faces obscured by gas masks, burst into the room. They weren't Joon-Hyuk's men. They didn't move with the cold precision of the Dragon's Guard. They moved with the frantic, violent energy of scavengers. Joon-Hyuk fired 3 times, the suppressed shots sounding like heavy coughs in the small space. 2 of the men went down instantly, but the third dived behind the sofa, returning fire with an Uzi. The safe chaos of the apartment was shredded in seconds. The finger paintings were torn by bullets, the library books exploded into confetti, and the jar of pebbles Nia had collected shattered, scattering her treasures across the blood-stained carpet. "Park! Get in here!" Joon-Hyuk shouted into his lapel mic, dragging Zara toward the hallway. The smoke was getting thicker, a choking curtain that turned the room into a nightmare. Zara clawed at the floor, reaching for the bedroom door, her fingers slick with the moisture of the smoke and her own tears. "My children! Joon-Hyuk! Get my children!" Joon-Hyuk shoved her into the small bathroom, his eyes blazing through the haze. "Stay here. Lock the door. If anyone but me tries to open it, you kill them." He thrust a small, heavy backup piece into her hands, the same kind of weapon she had seen him use to end lives 100 times. He didn't wait for her to answer. He turned and disappeared into the smoke, a ghost returning to the shadows. Zara sat on the cold tile floor, the gun heavy and freezing in her lap. She listened to the sounds of the world she had tried to escape tearing her home apart. The muffled grunts of men dying, the rhythmic thud of Joon-Hyuk's boots, and the terrifying, high-pitched scream of Nia calling for her mother. In that moment, Zara realized the ultimate cruel irony of her choice. She had chosen life over loyalty. But in the end, the blood in her children's veins was the only thing that mattered. The truth in the blood was a beacon, and no matter how deep she buried it, the monsters would always find the light. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had started. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. A heavy, suffocating blanket of dread. Zara held her breath, the gun raised, her finger trembling on the trigger. Then, a knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Zara, it's over. She unlocked the door with shaking hands. The smoke was clearing, drifting out of the shattered window into the gray morning. Joon-Hyuk was standing in the hallway, his charcoal suit torn, a streak of blood darkening his cheek. He was holding Nia in one arm, her face buried in his neck, and Noah was gripped tightly in his other hand, the boy's eyes wide and shock-still. Joon-Hyuk looked at Zara, and for the first time, there was no anger. There was only a grim, devastating understanding. "They're alive," he said, his voice thick with the smoke and the weight of the moment. "But the apartment is gone. The secret is gone. There is no more Zara Bennett." He stepped over the body of a fallen gunman, his eyes scanning the ruin of the life she had built. He looked at the broken jar of pebbles, the shredded math homework, and the missing glittery shoe Nia had finally found, now lying in a pool of spilled oil from the smoke canister. "You wanted them to be free, Zara," he said, his gaze meeting hers. "But the only way they survive tonight is if they belong to the dragon. Ryu Sungkwan is coming with everything he has. Loyalty isn't a luxury anymore. It's the only thing that keeps their hearts beating." Zara looked at her children, her beautiful, innocent twins, now covered in the dust of a war they were never supposed to know. She looked at the man she had run from, the man who was currently the only shield between them and the grave. She dropped the gun. It hit the tile with a hollow ring. "Take us," she whispered, her voice a ghost of the woman she had been 5 minutes ago. "Take us to your fortress." Joon-Hyuk nodded, his jaw tightening. He turned and led them out of the wreckage, toward the black SUVs waiting in the street. As they descended the stairs, the rain began to fall. A cold, torrential soul downpour that washed the gray smoke from the air, but couldn't touch the darkness that had finally caught up to them. The normal chaos was over. The war was no longer personal, it was total. And as the motorcade pulled away from the quiet suburb, Zara Bennett realized that she hadn't just returned to the dragon. She had become part of the fire. The transition from the quiet, cinnamon-scented halls of a Gyeonggi apartment to the cold, limestone grandeur of the Kang estate felt less like a drive and more like a descent into another dimension. As the motorcade swept through the massive wrought iron gates of the hilltop fortress, the twins pressed their faces against the bulletproof glass, their breath fogging the windows that separated them from a world they were never meant to see. Behind them, the ruins of their normal life, the charred cereal boxes and shattered finger paintings, were already being erased by a cleanup crew that moved with the silence of shadows. Zara sat in the middle of the back seat, her arms wrapped tightly around Noah and Nia, her body acting as a human barrier even though the threat now lay behind them. Beside her, Kang Joon-Hyuk sat in a state of rigid, watchful silence, his eyes fixed on the driveway but his mind clearly calculating the next move in a game that had just turned lethal. The estate was a masterclass in architectural intimidation. It was a sprawling monolith of glass, steel, and dark stone, perched on a cliffside overlooking the Han River. There were no flower beds here, no colorful swing sets, no signs of the safe chaos Zara had cultivated. Instead, there were gravel paths raked to perfection and security cameras that swiveled with predatory intent. As the SUVs came to a synchronized halt in the massive courtyard, a line of men in dark suits stood at attention. They were the dragon's teeth, men who had spent their lives learning how to take lives. Joon-Hyuk stepped out first, the cold mountain air whipping his coat around his legs. He didn't wait for a servant to open the door. He reached back and took Nia's hand, his movements surprisingly gentle for a man who had just ended 3 lives an hour ago. Zara stepped out next, Noah gripping her hand so hard his knuckles were white. The boy looked at the line of guards, his small jaw setting in that familiar, defiant line. He didn't look scared. He looked suspicious, a 5-year-old soldier evaluating the enemy's strength. "This is home now," Joon-Hyuk said, though it sounded more like a decree than an invitation. He looked at Zara, his eyes searching hers for a sign of surrender. "For 1 week we do this my way. A trial. You wanted them to be safe? This is what safety looks like in my world, Zara. It's built with walls, not secrets." They were led into the main foyer, a cavernous space of white marble and soaring ceilings that made the twins look impossibly small. Director Park was there, having already coordinated the security perimeter. Beside him stood a massive man with a jagged scar running through his eyebrow, the dragon's primary personal guard, a man the underworld called the Wall. "Nia Noah," Joon-Hyuk said, gesturing toward the guards. "These men work for me. They are here to make sure no one ever breaks a window in your home again. This is Uncle Sang-woo." The massive guard knelt, bringing himself eye level with the children. It was a jarring sight. A man who looked capable of crushing boulders trying to soften his features for a pair of 5-year-olds. Sang-woo reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 small, sleek devices. "GPS trackers," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They look like watches. They have games on them. But if you ever feel scared, you press the side, and I'll be there in 10 seconds. "Understood." Nia reached out, her small fingers brushing the scarred hand of the giant. "Do you have a gun?" she asked, her voice a tiny, clear bell in the vast hall. The silence that followed was deafening. Zara felt a cold sweat break out on her neck. She had spent 5 years shielding them from the very vocabulary of violence, only for her daughter to ask about weaponry within 5 minutes of arrival. Joon-Hyuk didn't lie to her. He didn't offer a sugary distraction. "He does," Joon-Hyuk replied, stepping closer. "Because there are people in this world who don't listen to words. Sang-woo is the reason those people will never get close to you again." The trial week began not with a tour of the playroom, but with a briefing. Zara was escorted to a room that felt more like a command center than a bedroom. The walls were lined with monitors displaying every inch of the estate. There were no soft edges here. Even the furniture felt like it had been designed for tactical utility. Joon-Hyuk stood by the window, watching as Sang-woo led the twins toward the private gardens. "They shouldn't be here, Joon-Hyuk," Zara whispered, her voice cracking as she watched her son mimic the stiff, upright gait of the guards. "You're turning them into miniature versions of yourself before they even know how to ride a bike. I am giving them the tools to survive the name they carry," Joon-Hyuk retorted, turning to face her. "You think you were protecting them by keeping them in the dark?" Ryu Sungkwan didn't care about their innocence. He cared about their blood. "If they are going to be targets, I will make sure they are targets that know how to bite back." The days that followed were a surreal collision of 2 irreconcilable lives. In the mornings, Zara tried to maintain the routine of Zara Bennett. She tried to make them breakfast, but the estate's kitchen was staffed by professional chefs who looked confused when she asked for a simple pan to fry eggs. She tried to read them stories, but the library was filled with leather-bound treatises on law, history, and war. Meanwhile, the twins were being seduced by the boss's cold world. They didn't see the blood or the ledgers. They saw a world of absolute power. Noah spent his afternoons in the security booth, fascinated by the thermal imaging and the way the guards moved in perfect, silent unison. He didn't ask for his toy cars anymore. He asked Sang-woo how the magic cameras could see through the dark. Nia, the more observant of the two, spent her time watching Joon-Hyuk. She would sit in the corner of his massive glass office while he conducted meetings that decided the fate of shipping lanes and construction bids. She watched the way men bowed to him, the way his voice never needed to rise to command the room. She was learning the gravity of her father's shadow, and to Zara's horror, she didn't seem to fear it. She seemed to be absorbing it. The emotional peak of the week came on the 3rd night. A storm had rolled in over the Han River, the thunder echoing through the stone halls like distant artillery. Zara found Joon-Hyuk in the dining hall, a space designed to seat 50, though only 4 places were set at the end of the long mahogany table. "They're changing," Zara said, her voice echoing in the vast room. "Noah doesn't talk about being an architect anymore. He spent 2 hours today asking Sang-woo how to tell if someone is lying. He's 5, Joon-Hyuk. He should be worried about whether he gets the blue crayon or the green one." Joon-Hyuk set down his wine glass, the crystal ringing against the wood. "He's a Kang, Zara. Whether you like it or not, the world will eventually demand he knows how to spot a liar. Would you rather he learn it now, from a man who loves him, or later, from a man who wants to kill him?" "You call this love?" Zara gestured to the dark-suited men standing in the corners of the room, their faces expressionless. "This is a siege. You've brought them into a fortress and told them it's a home. You're killing the children I raised and replacing them with heirs." Joon-Hyuk stood up, his presence filling the empty space between them. He walked toward her, his footsteps heavy on the marble. "The children you raised were living on borrowed time. I am giving them a future that doesn't end in a back alley. Look at them, Zara." He pointed to the doorway where Noah and Nia were standing, dressed in miniature versions of the sleek, dark clothes the estate staff wore. They weren't the messy, laughing children from the suburban apartment. They looked poised. They looked serious. They looked like they belonged in the limestone fortress. Noah stepped forward, his eyes fixing on Joon-Hyuk. "Father? Uncle Sang-woo says we have to do a perimeter check before bed. Can I see the monitors?" The word father hit Zara like a physical blow. It was the first time Noah had used it, and he had used it with a sense of duty, not affection. Joon-Hyuk's expression didn't change, but Zara saw the flicker of triumph in his eyes, and the devastating flicker of a man who realized he was finally being seen for who he truly was. "Go with Sang-woo," Joon-Hyuk said, his voice unusually soft. "Check the north gate. Tell me if the sensors are calibrated." As the children disappeared into the shadows of the hallway, Zara felt the last of her suburban life drifting away like smoke. The trial week wasn't about safety. It was about indoctrination. It was about proving to Zara that she couldn't compete with the lure of the dragon. "You're winning," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "You're taking them from me without even trying." Joon-Hyuk walked to her, his hand coming up to cup her jaw, his thumb dragging across her lower lip just as it had 5 years ago in the onyx room. The smell of wood smoke and ozone was overwhelming now, the scent of a man who owned the world and the woman standing in it. "I don't want to take them from you, Zara," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "I want you to stop running. The world is coming for us. Ryu Sungkwan isn't just sniffing around anymore. My scouts found his markers on the lower road tonight. The trial is over. You can't go back to being Zara Bennett. She died the moment that window shattered." Zara looked into the darkness of the estate, at the uncle guards who were teaching her son how to hunt and the boss, who was teaching her daughter how to rule. She realized that the two worlds hadn't just collided. One had utterly consumed the other. "What happens when the week is over?" she asked. Joon-Hyuk's grip on her jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with a cold, predatory light. "The week is never over, Zara. We are at war. And in this house we don't hide from the dark. We command it." Outside, the rain lashed against the reinforced glass, but inside the fortress, there was only the heavy, rhythmic silence of a kingdom preparing for battle. The twins were asleep in rooms guarded by men with scars, dreaming of GPS watches and perimeter checks, while their mother realized that the price of their life was the death of their innocence. The dragon had reclaimed his legacy, and the war was no longer at the gates. It was inside the walls. The transition from the fortified silence of the Kang estate to the chaotic, high-pitched energy of the elite international school was a jolt to Zara's nervous system. Even though the trial week was technically over, the rules had permanently changed. They no longer traveled in her beat-up sedan. They moved in a 2-car convoy of blacked-out SUVs. Noah and Nia didn't just hop out at the curb. They were escorted to the heavy oak doors by Sang-woo and another guard, their presence a silent, looming shadow against the backdrop of luxury cars and designer-clad parents. Zara stood by the SUV, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching her children disappear into the building. They looked different now. It had only been a few days, but the suburban softness was evaporating. Noah carried his backpack like a piece of tactical gear, his eyes scanning the playground with a strange, inherited suspicion. Nia walked with her chin a fraction higher, already accustomed to the way people moved out of the path of her uncles. "You're shaking, Zara." She didn't have to turn to know Joon-Hyuk was standing behind her. He had insisted on coming for the morning drop-off, a move that was as much about protection as it was about staking a claim. To the other parents, he was the mysterious Chairman Kang, a titan of industry. To Zara, he was the man who had brought the war to the school gates. "They're 5 years old, Joon-Hyuk," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the playground where children were playing tag. "They shouldn't have to look for exit routes before they start their morning snack. You've turned their school into a battlefield." "I didn't turn it into anything," Joon-Hyuk replied, his voice a low, raspy velvet that vibrated in the cold morning air. "Ryu Sungkwan did that the moment he put a price on their heads. I am simply acknowledging the reality. Look at the perimeter." Zara followed his gaze. Beyond the colorful plastic slides and the manicured lawn, the school was surrounded by a high decorative fence. But if you looked closer, you could see the anomalies. A silver sedan had been idling near the south gate for 20 minutes. 2 men in utility uniforms were working on a power box that didn't need fixing. "The shadow in the playground," Joon-Hyuk murmured, his hand coming to rest on the small of Zara's back. "He's not hiding anymore. He wants me to know he's close. He wants to see if I'll flinch." "And will you?" Zara turned to him, her eyes searching his for a flicker of the man she used to love, the man who once promised her a world without shadows. Joon-Hyuk's expression remained a mask of charcoal-colored iron. "The dragon doesn't flinch, Zara. He breathes fire." "Park." Director Park appeared at his side instantly, holding a tablet that displayed a live heat map of the school's surroundings. 2 vehicles confirmed, Chairman. Both linked to Ryu's shell companies. "They aren't moving in yet. They're just watching. They're gauging the response time," Joon-Hyuk said, his eyes narrowing as he watched the silver sedan. "They want to know how many men I've seated into the faculty. They want to know if I'll pull the children out." "Are you?" Zara asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Are you taking them back to the fortress?" "No," Joon-Hyuk said, a cold, predatory light dancing in his eyes. "If I pull them out now, Ryu knows I'm afraid. He knows he's found a crack in the armor. We stay, but we increase the pressure. Park, tell Sang-woo to move to Phase 2. No one enters that playground who hasn't been vetted through the biometric database. Anyone else gets a conversation in the alley." The day dragged on with an agonizing slowness. Zara refused to leave the school grounds. She sat in a small cafe across the street, her eyes glued to the playground through the window. She watched the shadows move. The silver sedan was replaced by a black delivery van. The utility workers were replaced by a man on a motorcycle. It was a slow-motion siege, a psychological war being played out over a game of hopscotch. Inside the school, the twins were oblivious to the tactical maneuvers happening around them, yet they were fundamentally altered. During the mid-morning recess, Zara watched through the fence as Nia sat on a bench, not playing, but observing. She was watching the gate. She was watching the teachers. She was doing exactly what Sang-woo had taught her during the trial week. She was identifying the anomalies. Noah was different. He was playing, but there was a grim intensity to it. When a stranger approached the fence to retrieve a stray ball, Noah was the first one there. He didn't run. He stood his ground, his small hands balled into fists, his gaze fixed on the man with a chilling, silent defiance. Sang-woo was there in a heartbeat, placing a large, protective hand on Noah's shoulder, but the message was sent. The boss's blood was no longer a secret. The climax of the tension came at 2 p.m. The black delivery van that had been idling near the north gate suddenly lurched forward, jumping the curb and stopping inches from the school's main entrance. Zara stood up so fast she knocked her coffee over, the brown liquid seeping into her white sweater like a bloodstain. Joon-Hyuk. But Joon-Hyuk was already moving. He had been sitting in his SUV monitoring the feeds. Before the van's doors could even open, 3 of Joon-Hyuk's contractors, men who had been disguised as parents and delivery drivers, were on it. It was a silent, brutal efficiency. No shots were fired. There were no screams. Just the sound of heavy bodies hitting metal and the muffled thud of a tactical takedown. By the time the school bell rang for dismissal, the van was gone. The silver sedan was gone. The playground looked as innocent as it had at dawn, the colorful slides gleaming in the afternoon sun. But the air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and ozone. Joon-Hyuk stood by the car as Noah and Nia ran toward them. For a split second, as the children laughed and showed off their drawings, it looked like a normal family. But then Sang-woo leaned in and whispered something into Joon-Hyuk's ear. Joon-Hyuk's jaw tightened. He looked at Zara, his eyes darkening to the color of a winter sea. Ryu Sungkwan just sent a message to my private line. He didn't want the kids today, Zara. He wanted to confirm the secret was out. He knows they're mine. And he knows exactly how much I'm willing to sacrifice to keep them. Zara looked at her children, her beautiful, innocent twins, who were currently arguing about who got to sit by the window. She looked at the playground, where a lone red ball had been left behind near the fence. The secret was dead. The normal chaos was a memory. The shadows had finally stepped into the light, and they weren't just watching anymore. He called them the Dragon's heirs, Joon-Hyuk whispered, his hand gripping the door handle so hard the metal groaned. He's not just coming for my territory anymore, Zara. He's coming for the legacy. He wants to end the bloodline. Zara felt a cold, numbing clarity wash over her. She realized then that there was no more running. There was no more Zara Bennett. There was only the woman who had mothered the heirs to a kingdom of blood, and the man who would have to burn the world down to keep them alive. What now? She asked, her voice a ghost of a whisper. Joon-Hyuk turned to her, and for the first time, he didn't look like a boss or a predator. He looked like a man who had finally realized that his fortress was a target. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw with a devastating tenderness. Now, he said, his voice a low, lethal promise. We stop playing defense. If Ryu wants to look into the playground, I'm going to show him exactly what lives in the dark. We're going to the war room, Zara. And this time, you're not just watching. You're the one who helps me decide which kingdoms have to burn. As the SUVs pulled away, leaving the playground in the rearview mirror, the rain began to fall. It wasn't a gentle spring shower. It was a cold, gray deluge that seemed to wash away the last traces of their suburban life. The shadow in the playground was gone, but the darkness was just beginning to spread. The secret was out, the war was personal, and the dragon was finally ready to roar. The transition from the limestone fortress of the Kang estate to the glass and steel monolith that housed the dragon's corporate empire was a study in cold, modern power. It was Saturday morning, a time when the normal chaos would have involved cartoons and sticky bowls of oatmeal. Instead, Noah stood in the center of a private elevator that moved with such silent speed that the only sensation was a slight pressure in his ears. He was dressed in a charcoal-colored sweater and dark trousers that mirrored his father's, his small face set in a look of intense, quiet observation. Zara stood behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had fought against this trip for 3 hours, but Joon-Hyuk had been unmovable. He hadn't asked. He had stated that the boy needed to see the office. When the doors slid open, they stepped directly into the top floor of the Kang Global Tower. It wasn't just an office. It was a cathedral of industry. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seoul, the Han River winding through the city like a silver serpent far below. The air smelled of expensive leather, filtered air, and that permanent, underlying scent of wood smoke and ozone that seemed to emanate from Joon-Hyuk himself. Joon-Hyuk was standing by the window, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't turn when they entered, but the static charge in the room shifted. The world looks small from here, doesn't it, Noah? The boy walked toward the glass, his eyes wide as he looked down at the toy-sized cars and the tiny, ant-like people scurrying along the sidewalks. It looks like a map, father. It is a map, Joon-Hyuk replied, finally turning. He didn't look like a man who had spent the night coordinating tactical strikes. He looked like the chairman, composed, lethal, and absolute. It's a map of things I've built, things I've taken, and things I have to protect. Most people only see the street level. They see the noise and the crowds. But a leader has to see the whole pattern. Zara stayed back, her eyes scanning the room. This was the seat of his power, the place where he made decisions that shifted the economy of a nation. But it was also the place where the dark side was managed. Behind the sleek mahogany desks and the high-tech conference tables lay the ledgers of a kingdom built on blood and fear. She saw the heavy vault door disguised as a wood-paneled wall and the row of encrypted monitors that flickered with data streams she didn't want to understand. Joon-Hyuk walked to his desk and sat down, gesturing for Noah to come closer. He pulled out a heavy, leather-bound folder. Inside weren't photos of enemies or blueprints of weapons, but architectural renderings of a massive development project. A series of community centers, hospitals, and low-income housing units. This is the legacy everyone sees. Noah, Joon-Hyuk said, his voice dropping to a low, instructive rumble. This is the clean side. It's what pays for the school you go to and the food you eat. It's the side I want you to run one day. Noah traced a finger over the drawing of a hospital wing. Uncle Sang-woo says you have another office. A dark one. Zara flinched. The child was too perceptive. A sponge absorbing the dangerous whispers of the fortress. She opened her mouth to intervene, but Joon-Hyuk held up a hand. He looked at his son with a terrifyingly honest respect. Uncle Sang-woo is right, Joon-Hyuk said. I have a dark office because the world is filled with people like Ryu Sung-kwon. People who don't care about hospitals or schools. They only care about what they can break. My job, the job I've held for 15 years, was to be the monster that kept the other monsters away from the door. He stood up and walked around the desk, kneeling so he was eye level with the boy. He took Noah's small, soft hands in his large, scarred ones. But being a monster comes with a price, Noah. It changes the air you breathe. It makes it so you can never truly sit with your back to a door. It makes the people you love targets. Joon-Hyuk looked up at Zara, and for a fleeting second, the chairman's mask slipped. There was a profound, aching weariness in his gaze, the look of a man who was tired of the weight of his own armor. I brought you here today, Joon-Hyuk continued, turning back to Noah, because I want to change the legacy. I don't want you to have a dark office. I want you to be a man who builds, not a man who has to burn things down to stay alive. But to do that, I have to finish the war I started. Do you understand? Noah nodded slowly, his eyes searching his father's face with an intensity that made Zara's breath catch. He looked so much like Joon-Hyuk in that moment, a miniature commander weighing the cost of a campaign. You have to stop the bad man so I can build the hospitals. Exactly, Joon-Hyuk said. He stood up and led Noah toward a large, hidden panel in the wall. He pressed a biometric scanner, and the wood slid back to reveal a high-tech surveillance suite. On the screens were live feeds of the school, the estate, and several black market docks. This is the most feared father at work, Joon-Hyuk whispered, more to Zara than the boy. I am dismantling Ryu's infrastructure piece by piece. Every shipping container he loses, every foot soldier who disappears. It's a brick in the wall I'm building around you. Zara walked over, standing beside them. She looked at the screens, seeing the cold, calculated violence required to maintain their safety. She realized then that Joon-Hyuk wasn't just showing Noah his power. He was showing him the burden. He was showing him that his boss persona wasn't a choice anymore. It was a sacrifice. You're stepping down, Zara realized aloud, the truth hitting her with the force of a physical blow. You're trying to go legit. Truly legit. Joon-Hyuk didn't look away from the monitors. Ryu thinks he can use the twins as leverage to take my territory. He doesn't realize that I'd give him every square inch of the underworld if it meant I could walk Noah and Nia through a park without a tactical team in the trees. But I can't just give it to him. If I give it to him, he becomes the most powerful man in Korea, and he'll kill us anyway just to ensure there are no rivals left. No, Sara. I have to destroy him. I have to be the monster one last time so our son never has to be one at all. Noah was mesmerized by the screens, watching the way the digital dots, representing Joon-Hyuk's teams, moved across the map of Seoul. He wasn't looking at them with bloodlust. He was looking at them with the mind of an architect. He was seeing the structure of protection. Father, Noah asked, pointing to a flickering red dot near the docks. Is that where the bad man is? Joon-Hyuk's expression hardened. That's where his shadow is, Noah. And tonight, I'm going to go and step on it. The atmosphere in the office shifted instantly. The trial week had been a prelude. The school incident had been a warning. But this was the declaration. Joon-Hyuk turned to Director Park, who was standing by the door. Get the girl and the boy back to the estate. Double the perimeter. I want Sang-woo on the roof with a long-range glass. Zara. He paused, walking over to her. He reached out, his fingers grazing her cheek with a tenderness that felt out of place in a room filled with surveillance screens and corporate power. Stay in the inner sanctum tonight. No matter what you hear on the comms, do not come out. Zara gripped his forearm, her fingers digging into the expensive fabric of his suit. Joon-Hyuk, don't go there. You said you wanted to change. You said you wanted to build. I am building, he whispered, leaning down to press his forehead against hers. I'm building a world where you don't have to be a ghost anymore. But first, I have to bury the man who made you one. As the elevator doors closed on Joon-Hyuk, leaving him standing in his glass cathedral, Zara looked at Noah. The boy was staring at his own reflection in the polished metal, adjusting his sweater with that sharp, precise flick of the wrist. He had seen the legacy. He had seen the most feared father in his natural habitat. The secret was out, the trial was over, and the dragon was no longer just defending his territory. He was fighting for the right to stop being a monster. But as the car sped toward the fortress, the rain began to lash against the windows again. A cold, gray omen that the night was going to be long, and the blood in the legacy wasn't going to be washed away easily. The transition from the sterile, high-altitude silence of the Kang Global Tower to the rain-slicked chaos of the Seoul Highway was instantaneous and violent. The sun had long since been swallowed by a thick, charcoal-colored fog, leaving the city's neon lights to reflect in jagged, electric pulses across the wet asphalt. Inside the lead SUV, Zara sat with her heart lodged in her throat, her hands gripping the seats until her nails bit into the leather. Noah and Nia were buckled into the middle row, their faces pale but their expressions eerily calm. The kind of stillness that came from a week of uncle guards and perimeter checks. They weren't crying. They were watching. Joon-Hyuk sat in the front passenger seat, his frame a dark silhouette against the dashboard's blue glow. He wasn't the chairman now, and he wasn't the most feared father. He was a weapon unsheathed. He held a tactical headset to his ear, his voice a low, lethal hum that barely rose above the hiss of the tires. They're coming for the rear flank, Park, Joon-Hyuk said, his eyes fixed on the side mirror. 3 black sedans. No plats. They aren't trying to hide anymore. They want the children. The war for Noah and Nia didn't begin with a shout. It began with the screech of metal on metal. The first sedan surged forward, ramming the back of the convoy with the force of a battering ram. The impact jarred the SUV, sending a jolt through Zara's spine. She reached back, her fingers brushing Nia's knee. Stay down. Get on the floor now. The twins obeyed with a chilling, practiced efficiency, slipping into the footwells as another impact sent the vehicle fishtailing across 3 lanes of traffic. Through the rear window, Zara saw a muzzle flash, a strobe light burst of yellow that shattered the night. The gunmen weren't aiming for the tires. They were spraying the cabin, their bullets sparks against the reinforced plating of the dragon's fleet. Park, take the exit at Seongsu, Joon-Hyuk commanded, his hand reaching into the center console to pull out a heavy-caliber handgun. I'm going to draw them toward the industrial zone. Keep the children's car moving toward the estate. Do not stop for anything. Not for the police, not for the fire. Only for the gates. Hoon-Hyuk, no. Zara's voice was a ragged plea. Don't leave us. He turned then, and for a fleeting second, the cold mask of the dragon cracked. He looked at Zara, then at the 2 small heads tucked away in the shadows of the floorboards. The men chasing them were Ryu Sungkwan's elite. Men who didn't take prisoners. Men who viewed children as nothing more than leverage to be discarded once used. Joon-Hyuk had known these children for 7 days. He had missed 5 years of their laughter, their first steps, their scraped knees. But in the way he looked at them now, Zara realized that time meant nothing to a man like him. He didn't need 5 years to know that he would burn the world to ash to keep them breathing. "I'm not leaving you, Zara," he whispered, his thumb grazing her cheek in a ghost of a touch. "I'm ending this." With a sudden, violent jerk of the wheel, the convoy split. Park accelerated toward the hills, while Joon-Hyuk's SUV veered sharply toward the darkened warehouses of the shipyard. 2 of the pursuit vehicles followed him, exactly as he had planned. The chase through the industrial district was a blur of steel and shadow. The rain turned into a deluge, blurring the world into a gray smear. Joon-Hyuk's driver, a man named Han who had been with him since the early days in the slums, navigated the narrow alleys with a suicidal grace. Behind them, the sedans opened fire again. A bullet finally found a weakness in the rear tire, and the SUV began to scream as the rubber shredded, leaving the rim to spark against the concrete. "Stop the car," Joon-Hyuk ordered. Han slammed on the brakes, the SUV skidding into a sideways halt that blocked the mouth of a dead-end alley. Joon-Hyuk was out of the door before the vehicle had even stopped moving. He didn't take cover. He stood in the middle of the rain-drenched street, the charcoal fabric of his suit darkening to black, his shadow stretching long and menacing under the flickering orange streetlights. The 2 sedans screeched to a halt 20 yards away. 6 men piled out, their faces obscured by tactical masks. They held submachine guns, their barrels leveled at the man who stood alone between them and the heirs he had claimed. "Where are the children, Dragon?" one of the men shouted, his voice muffled by the rain. "Give them to us, and maybe Ryu will let you live long enough to watch your empire fall." Joon-Hyuk didn't answer. He didn't need to. He raised his weapon and fired. The shootout was a symphony of violence that Zara could only hear through the open comms on Han's dashboard. She was miles away, her SUV racing toward the safety of the fortress, but the sound of the gunfire echoed in her chest. She heard the cough of Joon-Hyuk's gun, the frantic shouts of Ryu's men, and the terrifying metallic clack of a weapon jamming. "Chairman is down. He's hit," Han shouted into his radio, his face pale as he checked the GPS tracker on Joon-Hyuk's suit. Zara felt her heart stop. "Go back. Han, turn the car around." "I have my orders, Miss Bennett," Han roared, tears of frustration mingling with the sweat on his brow. "The children are the priority. If the chairman falls, I have to ensure the bloodline survives." Back in the alley, Joon-Hyuk was leaning against a rusted shipping container, his hand pressed against his side where a bullet had grazed his ribs. Blood was soaking through his white shirt, but his eyes were bright with a cold, terrifying clarity. He looked at the 4 men left standing. They were closing in, thinking they had cornered a dying beast. But a father isn't a beast. He is a force of nature. Joon-Hyuk moved with a speed that defied his injuries. He didn't just fire, he hunted. He used the environment as a weapon, disappearing into the shadows of the containers only to reappear behind a gunman like a vengeful ghost. He fought with a desperation he had never felt in all his years of gang wars. When he had fought for territory, he had been careful. When he had fought for power, he had been calculated. But now, fighting for Noah and Nia, he was infinite. He took another hit to the shoulder, the force of the bullet spinning him around, but he didn't drop his gun. He leaned into the pain, using it to sharpen his focus. He saw the face of Ryu's lead enforcer, the man who had led the attack on the school. "You touched my playground," Joon-Hyuk hissed, his voice a low, predatory growl that silenced the rain. He fired 2 shots, one for Noah, one for Nia. The enforcer fell, and the remaining men, seeing the monster refuse to die, finally broke. They scrambled back to their cars, but Joon-Hyuk didn't let them go. He emptied his magazine into the engine blocks, ensuring they wouldn't follow the children. By the time the silence returned to the shipyard, Joon-Hyuk was the only thing standing. He dropped the empty gun into a puddle, his breath coming in ragged, bloody gasps. He looked down at his hands, the hands he had wanted to keep clean for Noah, the hands that were now stained with the cost of their safety. "Park!" he whispered into his headset, his voice barely audible over the thunder. Tell me they're inside the gates. They're home, Chairman." Park's voice crackled through the static, thick with relief. "They're safe." Zara is with them. Joon-Hyuk closed his eyes, his body finally giving way to the exhaustion and the blood loss. He sank to his knees in the mud, the rain washing the gunpowder from his skin. He had known them for a week. He had never seen them blow out birthday candles or heard them tell a joke. But as he looked up at the gray Seoul sky, he knew he would do it all again. He would die 1,000 deaths just to ensure they never had to know the name of the man who had protected them. Hours later, the motorcade returned to the estate. Zara was waiting in the foyer, her eyes red from crying, her hands trembling. When the doors opened and Sang-woo carried a pale, blood-stained Joon-Hyuk inside, she let out a sob that echoed through the marble halls. The twins were watching from the top of the stairs. They saw the blood. They saw the torn suit. But they also saw the man who had stood between them and the dark. Noah didn't look away this time. He didn't hide behind the banister. He walked down the stairs, his small face set in a look of profound, tragic understanding. He walked over to where the medics were laying Joon-Hyuk on a stretcher. He reached out and touched his father's cold, scarred hand. "You stopped the bad man," Noah whispered. Joon-Hyuk opened his eyes, his gaze finding his son's. He didn't look like the dragon. He didn't look like the chairman. He looked like a father who had finally found something worth living for. "I told you," Joon-Hyuk rasped, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I'm building the hospitals." As they wheeled him away toward the private medical wing, Zara looked at the children. The war for Noah and Nia was over for tonight, but the world had changed. The normal chaos was a dream of the past. They were the heirs to a kingdom of fire, and their father had just proven that he would burn his own soul to keep them warm. The medical wing of the Kang estate was a cathedral of silent efficiency, smelling of antiseptic and the faint, underlying scent of rain that seemed to cling to the stone walls. For 3 days, the only sounds were the steady, rhythmic beeping of heart monitors and the soft footsteps of doctors who moved like ghosts. Joon-Hyuk lay in the center of it all, his powerful frame rendered fragile by white bandages and the translucent tubes that tethered him to life. Zara hadn't left his side. She had traded her faded suburban sweaters for a silk robe that felt like a shroud, sitting by his bed with a vigilance that bordered on prayer. When Joon-Hyuk finally opened his eyes, the world didn't rush back with a roar. It returned with the soft, amber glow of a sunset hitting the Han River. He looked at Zara, his gaze unfocused for a moment before the sharp, predatory clarity returned. He didn't ask where he was or how he had survived. He looked at the woman who had spent 5 years running from him and saw that she had finally stopped. "The children?" His voice was a mere rasp, a ghost of the command it used to be. "Asleep," Zara whispered, leaning forward to press her cool palm against his forehead. "Sang-woo is sitting outside their door. They haven't left the inner sanctum since you brought them home. They're waiting for you, Joon-Hyuk. We're all waiting." Joon-Hyuk closed his eyes, a long, shuddering breath escaping his chest. He had fought the war. He had bled for the legacy. But as he lay there, he realized that the dragon couldn't survive the peace he had just bought. To keep them safe, he had to destroy the version of himself that made them targets. A week later, the new chairman was born. The transition was not a quiet affair. It was a clinical, cold-blooded dismantling of an empire. Joon-Hyuk sat in his office, no longer the glass cathedral in the city, but a reinforced study within the estate. Director Park stood before him, holding a series of black leather ledgers that contained the names of every shadow operation, every dockside deal, and every enforcer on the payroll. "The Ryu syndicate is finished, Chairman," Park reported, his voice devoid of emotion. "The shipyard incident broke their spine. The remaining families are waiting for your word. They expect a consolidation. They expect you to take the throne Ryu left vacant." Joon-Hyuk looked at the ledgers. For 15 years, these books had been his Bible. They represented the blood he had spilled and the fear he had cultivated to keep himself at the top of the food chain. He looked at his bandaged shoulder, then at the door where he could hear the faint, distant laughter of Nia chasing Noah through the hallway. "There will be no consolidation," Joon-Hyuk said, his voice flat and absolute. "Close the books, Park. Every shadow contract, every dark asset, liquidate them. The shipping lanes are to be sold to the government at cost. The enforcers are to be given a severance that buys their silence for a lifetime. Anyone who resists is to be reminded why they feared the dragon in the first place. Park froze. Chairman, you're talking about a vacuum. If you step down, the underworld will descend into chaos. You're giving up the only shield you have. I'm not giving up a shield, Joon-Hyuk replied, standing up with a grimace of pain. He walked to the window, watching Sang-woo toss a ball to Noah on the lawn. I'm putting down a sword that's too heavy for my children to carry. From this moment on, Kang Global is a construction and medical technology firm. Nothing more, nothing less. If the underworld wants a king, they can find a new one. I'm retiring the crown. The process took months. It was a war of a different kind. A war of lawyers, accountants, and non-disclosure agreements. Zara watched as the men in tactical gear were slowly replaced by men in suits carrying blueprints. She watched as the security cameras remained, but the uncle guards began to dress like traditional domestic staff. The fortress was becoming a home, and the predator was becoming a titan of industry. One evening, as the first snow of winter began to dust the Han River, Joon-Hyuk called Zara into the library. He was dressed in a simple cashmere sweater, the hard lines of his face softened by the warmth of a crackling fireplace. On the desk lay a thick stack of papers. I bought back the apartment building in Gyeonggi, he said, his voice quiet. Zara felt a pang of nostalgia and fear. Why? We can't go back there, Joon-Hyuk. The secret is out. We aren't going back, he said, handing her a pen. I bought it to tear it down. In its place, we're building the first Bennett Kong Community Center. It's a place for single mothers and children who need a safe harbor. It's fully funded by the legit side of the business. No shadow money. No blood. Zara looked at the plans. She saw her old neighborhood transformed into something beautiful. Something that didn't smell of wood smoke and ozone, but of fresh paint and possibility. She looked at Joon-Hyuk and saw the man she had always wanted him to be. The man who could use his power to heal instead of hurt. You really did it, she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. You stopped the music. I gave you the peace you ran for, he said, walking to her and taking her hands. His scars were still there, the one on his shoulder, the one on his ribs, but they were no longer badges of war. They were the price of admission to a normal life. It's not the suburbs, Zara. You'll always have guards at the gate, and the world will always know the name Kong. But Noah will never have to hold a gun, and Nia will never have to hide behind a bar. He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in 5 years, Zara didn't feel like a ghost. She didn't feel like she was living in the crosshairs. She felt the steady, heavy beat of a heart that belonged to her and her children. The new chairman was no longer Korea's most feared man. He was its most protective. He had traded the underworld for a boardroom, and his dark office for a playroom filled with plastic blocks and glittery shoes. The dragon hadn't died. He had simply found a treasure worth more than gold and territory. That night, for the first time, they all sat at the long mahogany table. Not as a boss and his legacy, but as a family. Noah argued about his vegetables. Nia searched for a missing doll. It was chaos. It was loud. It was messy. It was safe chaos. As the snow fell silently outside the reinforced glass, Zara looked at Joon-Hyuk. He was helping Nia cut her food, his large, lethal hands moving with a delicate precision. The war was over. The legacy had changed. And as the music of their laughter filled the stone halls, Zara realized that she hadn't just survived the dragon. She had saved him. Seeing this community grow around Zara's journey has been the best part of creating this series. To every single one of you liking and sharing, thank you. I'd love to know the reach of the dragon's legacy today. What part of the world are you tuning in from? Comment your flag or your city below. I'm checking the comments now to see just how global our family has become.